Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. As I said last week, this is another one that I'm not live for, but as I say always, there will be someone uh, monitoring the comments and responding. So please do continue to comment and say hello and say where you are. My name's Lorna Steele. I know for those of you who watch this every week, you'll be utterly fed up of me saying that. But if you're new to it, my name's Lorna. I'm the Community Engagement Officer at the Highland Archive Service, and my job involves sharing our collections with all sorts of audiences and all sorts of people in a lot of different ways. And this is one of the things we're doing while we're locked down at the moment and not able to have people in looking at the original documents. So if you want to look back at the previous films that we've done, so we've covered all sorts of subjects from education and the Victorians and World War One and all sorts of different subjects. Those are all available on our Facebook page and also on the High Life Highland YouTube channel. So I hope you're able to go back and have a look at some of those and do some of the linked activities that are on our website. This week we're looking at crime and punishment, which is normally one of everybody's favourite subjects because it's so full of stories. As a lot of you will know, usually what I do is look through my own family papers and see what I can find that would tie into the theme. As far as I'm aware, I've not got any criminals, probably do, but I'm not aware of having any. And as far as I'm aware, I've not got anyone in the police either. So the only thing I could find was a letter written by my granddad to Downing Street requesting that we bring back the death penalty, and I'm not super proud of that, so I'm not going to show you that letter. So this week I have nothing of my own to show you, but all sorts of awesome things from our collections to tell you about. As I've said before, we have 4 offices in the Highland Archive Service. So we have one in Inverness, one in Wick. This will make no sense to you, but I'm pointing to each of them. One in Lochaber and one on the Isle of Skye. And there are some examples from different offices up on our website for you to have a look at after this. I'm going to talk through some of the different records we hold to do with crime and punishment. So we hold a variety of court process papers, which are things like arrest warrants, things like that. I'll tell you more about those in a second. And those are from the High Court, the Sheriff Court, the Borough Court, and the JP Court. And I'll tell you all about those in a second. We also hold a lot of police records. So we hold the records of the Northern Constabulary, historic records. You can also find references to crime in privately deposited collections, family papers, all sorts of different things. So to start off with, I'm going to tell you something about our court papers. So I'm aware, again, as I am every week, that there's a mixture of ages and audiences listening to me. So I hope there'll be something here for someone of every age group. But the main thing to know about crime and punishment records is that there's just so many interesting stories in there. So I said there are different types of court. So we hold the records for the High Court, the Sheriff Court, the JP Court and the Borough Court. And as I say, those are only the process papers. So others are held by the National Records of Scotland in Edinburgh. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the High Court papers because, to be frank, they're the ones with the most interesting and exciting stories in them. So the High Court was the Supreme Court, so for criminal cases. So they were the highest court that could deal with things like murder and treason and big serious crimes. And they could administer really big punishments. So things like they could give out the death penalty, because obviously we still had the death penalty in this country in the times that our records cover. They could also banish people from the country, and I'm going to come on and tell you a little bit more about that in a second. Examples within these collections are things like we've got the records to do with a man called Duncan Kennedy. He was found guilty of stealing cattle in 1764. So not what we would think of as a massively serious crime now, but he was sentenced to be sent out to His Majesty's plantations in America. So he was told that he had to leave Scotland and he was not to come back. So a difference in what we would see as a fair punishment for a crime these days. One of the documents I've put up on the website for you to have a look at is mind-blowing. It's about a lady called Anne Jackson, and she was found guilty of the crime of forgery. So I don't know what she forged. So forgery, for any kids watching, means that you're writing, you're faking something. So you're putting, whether she forged somebody's handwriting and made it look like they'd said something, or she forged a check to make it look like, forged something to do with money to make it look like someone had given her money. I don't know. But anyway, it means faking something to look like something else. Maybe she forged like a Rembrandt or something. I don't know. Anyway, she was taken to the toll booth in Inverness, which was the jail, and we'll come back to the toll booth in a second. When she was found guilty, her sentence was that she would have her hands tied behind her back with rope. And the executioner, so we still had someone in the town in Inverness then who would execute people if they had been found guilty and sentenced to death. So the executioner walked behind her holding the rope, and she was to walk all around the streets of Inverness wearing a sign saying, "My name is Anne Jackson, I am a forger and I shouldn't be trusted." She then had to, after that, which you can imagine how awful and embarrassing and shaming that would be, and she had to walk around the streets, and then she had to get taken to outside the townhouse in the middle of Inverness, and she had to stand for an hour. The time is specified as between 1 and 2 o'clock, which would have been the most busy time and lots of people about. And she had to stand in a pillory, which is a wooden frame that you put your head and hands through. So you've probably seen those in something like Horrible Histories or uh, things to do with crime in the past. So you put your hands and head through this wooden frame, and people in the streets could throw things at you. They could throw rotten vegetables or eggs or whatever they wanted to, really. So she had to do that for an hour. And then after that, she was sentenced to go to America for the rest of her life and not be allowed to come back. And that was for forgery. So that document's up on the website for you to have a look at. It's amazing to me that we still have these, these documents and these records of things that happen to people. And that's one there for you to look at. Another really exciting High Court one is the story of Hew McCloud. So you might have noticed, if you can see well closely to what I'm wearing, one of my lockdown projects has been making a scarf embroidered by some of the names of the people in our records. And so Hew McCloud is one of the people who's on my scarf. I won't be able to find him at speed, so I'll stop looking, but he's one of the people on here. So let me tell you a little bit about Hew McCloud. He is known as the Assynt murderer. And Assynt is an area of Sutherland up on the coast. He was found in 1830. A gentleman called Murdock Grant went missing. He was a peddler, which meant that he went around the country selling things. And he had gone missing, and nobody knew where he was or what had happened to him. 4 weeks later, his body was found floating in a loch in Assynt, or by the side of the loch. They asked around what had happened to him. Was it an accident? Had he just fallen and bashed his head? Had something happened to him? And one of the people they asked for advice was Hew McCloud, who was the local schoolmaster. He was well respected. They thought he was clever, and they thought he would, tell the truth and try and work it out. And so they interviewed him, and he said, "Oh, no, I think it's an accident. I'm sure it's an accident." And that was that. But one thing they couldn't work out is, where had all Murdock Grant's things gone? If he was a salesman, he should have had things to sell with him. They thought he had about £40 with him, which was quite a lot of money. But none of this was found near the body. So if it was an accident, then what had happened to him? What had happened to all his things? It kind of stopped being talked about for a little while. They couldn't work it out. And then one day, someone called Kenneth Fraser, whose nickname was Kenneth the Dreamer, went to the local authorities and said, I've had a vision, I've had a dream that Murdock Grant's things are all hidden underneath a cairn, hidden underneath a pile of stones in this location. And so they went to the cairn and they found some of his clothes and some of his possessions under there. Now, to my mind, that suggests Kenneth the Dreamer knew something about it. But anyway, I wasn't on the jury. And so they started asking questions again. Now, by this point, Hew McCloud, who was the school teacher, had lost his job, but somehow still had quite a lot of money. And they were wondering why he still had money if he didn't have a job. How did he have a £5 note? So after some time, they arrested Hew McCloud and searched his house, and they found in there some of Murdock Grant's clothes, some of his possessions. And so he was found guilty of the murder. Now, for a long time, he said, "Oh, I didn't commit the murder. I'm innocent. I didn't do it." But he was found guilty. And eventually, the story goes that eventually he did confess to a minister that he had used a hammer to murder Murdock Grant. Now, who knows? He was found guilty in Inverness at the High Court. He was sentenced to death. He was executed. So he was hanged down by the Longman. So those of you who know Inverness will know now that Longman is mostly car showrooms and industrial estate. But there used to be a gallows there for hanging criminals, and so he was hanged there. And then his body was sent to Edinburgh to the university to be dissected for science. And if you go onto our website, you'll be able to see that death warrant there. It's a beautiful written document with the crest of Inverness with the camel stamped onto it. But yeah, I've always wondered what happened there. It seems a bit strange to me that Kenneth the Dreamer would have known all about it. Could have been a vision. He could have known. He could have seen Hew McCloud doing something, or he could have been more involved. Who knows? All we know is that now it makes a great story, and quite often when I'm working with secondary schools like Milburn, hello, is anyone in Milburn watching? We use that document with them to write ghost stories and to write stories about what it would be like to transport a body of a criminal all the way through from Inverness down to Edinburgh on a horse and cart, and what would happen when you got there, and then before the body was cut up for science. So I said that the gibbet, which is where we used to hang people, was down by the Longman. Previously, before that, it used to be in different places up, for those of you who know Inverness, up by Anfield Road, so you can have a wee look on a map if you're not in Inverness and see where that is. So there used to be a gibbet there, and there used to be sometimes one up on Castle Hill as well. We hold the treasurer's accounts for Inverness in our collections, and in there are all sorts of receipts for paying the hangman, for paying him to do things like with Anne Jackson, where he would walk through the street with her. He would buy rope, he would buy knives to cut down the criminals, all sorts of things. So when the world is normal again and you can all come back in, you'll have to come and have a look at the treasurer's accounts, full of all those payments and stories to do with people getting into trouble with the law. We looked in Jacobites Week at the dress warrants, so that's another document that sit in our court records. People being sent to jail for 6 months for wearing a kilt after the Battle of Culloden. So those are in the court papers as well. There are also records of crime and punishment in the church records. So that's quite surprising to us now that the church would go around disciplining people or telling them off for doing the wrong thing. But the church had a lot of power, and they would there were certain crimes if you were drinking on the Sabbath, on Sundays, if you were making a lot of noise in the street and causing like a breach of the peace, then the church would step in and be involved in that. So there's all sorts of references to crimes within different collections. So that's some of the court records. We also hold police records. And again, there are all sorts of these on the website for you to have a look at when we're done here. At the risk of being boring with some dates, I just want to throw a couple of dates at you because they're quite key. The first one is 1839. That was what was called the Rogue Money Act. And that meant that for the first time, money could be collected to offset the cost of arresting people and keeping them in jail and prosecuting them and so on. So it's quite expensive to run a justice system. And so this was money that could be used for that. So that was 1839. And then the next year, 1840, Inverness Constabulary was set up. So really quickly after that. And then the next, I think this is the last key date I'm going to give you on this one, was 1857, and that was the Police Scotland Act. And that meant that every county that didn't already have a police force had to set up a police force. And so by then, you find widespread police forces. And we hold all sorts of records on behalf of Northern Constabulary. We hold things like some staffing records that tell you a little bit about the people who worked in the police force. For each one, it shows you what their history is, each police station that they've worked at, where they've been transferred from and to, if they've done anything really good and they get a medal or an award, or if they've done anything a bit dodgy and got into trouble. Quite a lot of drinking on duty we find in those records. So those are really interesting records, full of stories again, and really good for family historians. If you find that you've got a police officer in your family history, then you might find something interesting in there. We hold charge books, so those are the things, or detention books, things people who have committed crimes and they're getting put into prison, or getting held for a few days while it's investigated. And those hold all sorts of things. And one of the ones we've put up for you to have a look on the website is from Fort William Police Station, and it includes people being held there for all sorts of crimes. There's someone who gets taken to the police station for playing shinty in the street. There's someone who gets taken there because he's let a dog run loose. I think my all-time favourite is someone who gets sent there for stealing one cabbage. Theft of a cabbage. There's theft of carrots, turnips, all sorts of things. Very interesting for showing you what was different, what was held as really important then, because probably now if someone stole one cabbage, probably wouldn't be that bothered. But different times. So there's some of those for you to have a look at as well and see the sorts of things that people were being arrested for or being reported for. But as I said, again, they're full of stories. So the best ones for stories, the best police records, are daily occurrence books. So these were diaries written by police officers every day as they went about their duty. And they write about where they are working, how many miles they're walking every day, who they've seen. So quite often they would go around a different village and just check up on different things. And they talk about that. They show that often they would start work at 8 o'clock in the morning and still be working at 10 o'clock at night, with no cars, with no maybe a bike, but maybe just walking. So there's a couple of those up on the website that I wanted to tell you about. The first one is from Wick, and it's from 1914. And this is about the theft of some clothing. So there's a gentleman called Nels Anderson who had gone to the police and said, my clothing has all been stolen. So he had was living on a ship that had come into Wick Harbour. He'd gone to bed at about 8 o'clock. It presumably had a perfectly nice evening with Harry Cooper, who was the only other person on the ship. He'd gone to bed at 8 o'clock, leaving only Harry Cooper there, and when he'd got up in the morning, all his clothes had been stolen, and Harry Cooper had gone, and Harry Cooper's clothes had been left. So it's almost like he'd just sat there and gone, I don't like my clothes anymore, I want your clothes. So he'd taken all of them and left his clothes behind. So all sorts of things the police have to investigate. There's also one that I read during the Second World War, of the police at Beaulieu having to investigate an officer who had lost a pair of dress trousers somewhere between Beaulieu and Inverness, which makes you wonder what you're doing with your trousers that you can lose them halfway along a road. But there you go. I assume he wasn't wearing them. The other one I wanted to tell you about is from 1869, so much older. Those of you who were watching for Local Area Week might remember we talked a little bit about the gold rush in Sutherland that happened in the late 1860s and all the hundreds of people that flocked to Sutherland because there was gold found in the rivers and around about Kildonan. So the second one I wanted to, police occurrence book I want to tell you about relates to that. And it's about theft of gold from a shop near Ballinor, which was the gold town. So Duncan Fraser, I'm just checking that I've got his surname right. Duncan Fraser, who was the shopkeeper, he kept gold in a coffee canister in his shop, a couple of ounces, 1 or 2 ounces, so quite a lot of gold. And he kept it on the shelf behind him in his shop. But every now and then, when people came to the village and wanted to know about what had been found and what gold there was, he would show them and tell them about it. And this is what happened one day. He found the gold. He had it in his canister on his shelf, and someone came in asking about it. And so he got the canister out, took all this gold out, and showed the person in the shop and said, "Yeah, look what I found." Later on in the day, he went to get the gold to show the next person. I mean, really, you should stop showing people all your gold. That's the moral of this story. But anyway, he got his gold to show it the next person, but the canister was empty. So all the gold had gone, and he just had the empty box left on his shelf. So he went to the police and said, "I'm pretty sure this would be stolen by someone called Robert Ryder, who is a commercial traveller from Birkenhead, so just near Liverpool, and he'd been in the shop earlier, and I'd showed him, and I'm absolutely sure that's who'd stolen it." So the police all rushed round to Robert Ryder's house, had a look through his things, couldn't find anything. And so they came back and they said to Duncan Fraser, "No, we've spoken to Robert Ryder, there's nothing." But Duncan Fraser said, "No, I am absolutely sure that's who's stolen it. It's the only person who could have stolen it." So back they go to Robert Ryder. And this time they search him even more thoroughly, all his possessions and all his clothes. And they make him take his clothes off, they take his shoes off. And at the last minute, they tip his shoes upside down and they found all the gold wrapped up in a piece of leather and hidden in the toe of his boot. And so he got taken away. He got taken to Dornoch jail. We have a lot of records to do with Dornoch jail. I'll come back to that in a second. But if you think about this, he got sentenced. So he was found guilty of stealing this gold, and he got sentenced to 30 days imprisonment. And if you compare that to the person who, 180 years previously had stolen the cows and who got sentenced to banished, never to come back to Scotland again, or to Anne Jackson with forgery, with the sign and the shame that had, and being whipped through the street and then being sent away from Scotland forever. And this person who admitted that he'd stolen gold only got sent to prison for 30 days. So you can use all of these records to see how things have changed and how we look at crimes differently, and how we punish people differently, and how the different things we've learned about how to deal with people when they're doing things wrong, or why they're doing things wrong. And again, one of the this is one of the documents I use with secondary school pupils to think about, if you've all you know about Robert Ryder and that theft is in that police occurrence book. But why don't you think about all the different reasons? He could be someone who stole it because he was absolutely desperate to support his wife and family. He could steal it because he was just greedy and he wanted it. We don't know, and we'll never know. But archives, as well as providing us with a lot of facts, can also provoke and prompt all these stories in your head and make you think about, why did that happen? What happened when he was taken to Dornoch jail? What happened to the person previously when they were? How did Anne Jackson feel when she was in the street, in the pillory, with people throwing things at her? There's so many things that these stories can spark your imagination. So all of these different things I've talked about are up on the website for you to have a look at. So I hope you do that. That's such a small selection of the crime and punishment records we hold. We hold so many different amazing things. And the last one I just wanted to touch on quickly, I had mentioned Dornoch Jail. We've got the records for Patrick Seller, who many of you will be familiar with, to do with the clearances, him being put into Dornoch Jail, but we're going to come back to that in Clearances Week, which I think off the top of my head is the 2nd of July, but it's down further down the line anyway. But the last one I wanted to just quickly touch on, because the storyboard is up there on our website for you to have a look at, and that's the story of John Adam, who was the Mulbewey murderer, who was the last person to be hanged in Inverness, and a fascinating story of the murder that he committed, and then how he was condemned to have his body buried forever in the precincts of the jail, and how that moved around, how his bones have been dug up and moved to follow the police station around. So all of that is up on the website for you to have a look at as well. I hope that's been interesting, giving you some things to think about. Please go onto the website, have a look at the documents, do some of the activities. There's some things there to think about, stories to think about, being in the police force, all sorts of different things. If you do activities, please share them with us, because it's lovely to see what people are doing. If you want to share them with the hashtag HLHLearn with Lorna, then do that, or feel free to email them to us, or just let us know if you're doing anything. That would be great. Next week, something quite topical. We're looking at fake news and reliable sources, and how do we trust what we find in documents, or the information that's given to us. How do we know that that is accurate and reliable? Who do we trust? What do we base that on? And how can we prove it? So that's what we're looking at next week. So I hope you can join us for that. But in the meantime, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and I hope wherever you're watching from, I hope the situation is improving.